I think it's a great idea, and I would like to thank Philippe and Giselle for organizing this small meeting. And it's a great opportunity to see all of you, some old friends. I think we should do that more than every 25 years. I think it's a good idea to meet. Okay, I'll tell you about the interaction between cancer and the immune system. And the interaction is usually, or was classically described as one in which, in fact, immune cell, if you want the proper immune response, the immune cells are able to detect and eliminate most of the cancer cells before they develop into a clinically detectable tumor. I will try to convince you that this classical view of the interaction between the immune system has been now supplanted by a more complex one, in which, in fact, cells from the immune system are playing both pro- and anti-tumoral role on that. We need to understand this interaction. But first, in support of the classical view of the interaction between the immune system on the cancer, I think it's well recognized now that, in fact, immunosuppressed individuals have a higher chance of developing cancer. And not only cancer which are associated with viral infection, but even, for example, if you look at kidney cancer, the kidney cancer is 9 times more frequent in the recipient of organ transplant, which are on long-term immunosuppression. So there is no doubt that the immune system can control or prevent the development of cancer. And in our favored model, you know, the rat AD model, which is a transgenic mouse which developed a spontaneous melanoma, we could in fact demonstrate that the depletion of the CD8 T cell in fact accelerate the onset of visceral metastasis detected here by PET scan and shorten the survival of the mice. In fact, it has been now shown in a large set of cancer, and especially in the lab of Hervé Friedman, you know, for colorectal cancer, but also in melanoma, that the presence of T cell within the tumor constitutes a favorable prognosis. It's important here to stress that it's, the presence of T cell in the blood is not sufficient. The T cell have to have access to the tumor in order to constitute a favorable prognosis. We were able to extend the list of cancer in which T-cell infiltration constitutes a favorable prognosis by showing that in hepatocellular carcinoma as well, the presence of either T-cell or NK cell within the tumor is associated with a prolonged survival. In order to understand the mechanism by which, in order to go a little bit further, in fact, we analyze the expression of immune genes within the tumor of HCC patient, and we are able, using, you know, self-learning algorithm on all these fancy techniques, we are able to identify a signature of 14 immune genes whose expression is correlated with the prolonged survival of the patient. And we could prospectively validate this immune signature in an independent cohort of HCC liver cancer patient from Hong Kong and Zurich. In order to go one step further, we wanted to understand the mechanism by which expression of this immune gene within the tumor translate into a prolonged survival, and we did that by crossing, in fact, information from 5 different sources. First, the transcriptome of our tumor. Second, the expression of various gene, antigen using immunofluorescence and immunohistochemistry from the same sample of the same patient. FACS analysis on tumor-infiltrating leukocyte purified from fresh tumor, but also in vitro work from cell line and in vivo work using a mouse model of HCC. And we wanted specifically to start with, you know, chemokine. Our signature contains, as you can see here, marker of T cell, for example, Th1 cell, CD8 cell, NK cell, but chemokine and inflammatory cytokine and toll-like receptor. So the question that we ask for the chemokine is which cell within the tumor are expressing this chemokine. And in the case of CXCL10, you know, IP10, we could demonstrate that IP10 was expressed by both the TIL and the parenchymal cell fraction. More specifically, we could demonstrate that macrophages and HCC parenchymal cell were expressing CXCL10. Using in vitro HCC cell line, we could demonstrate that treating this cell line with two inflammatory cytokines, interferon gamma and TNF, which are present in our signature, induce the expression of CXCL10. So did, in fact, poly-IC, the ligand for TLR3, in combination with interferon gamma, not only at the transcriptional level, but at the protein level as well. And because we don't completely trust cell line in vitro, we verify back in the transcriptome of our patients that expression of CXCL10 was nicely correlated with expression of interferon gamma TNF on TLR3 ligand, on TLR3, sorry. Regarding the receptor, we could demonstrate that the receptor, the receptor for CXCL10 is CXCR3, which is expressed in our sample by T cell. On the TIL, we could demonstrate that it was expressed on T cell and NK cell. And in vitro, using HCC cell line treated with interferon gamma plus poly-IC, we could demonstrate that this treatment not only induced CXCL10, but was inducing chemotaxis of T cell and NK cell, and that this chemotaxis was blocked by an anti-CXCR3 antibody. Again, in order to verify or validate our data in patient sample, we observed that expression of CXCL10 in the patient sample was nicely correlated with expression of CD8, TBET, a marker of Th1, and NCR3, a marker of NK cell. And this was further confirmed at the protein level by looking at the expression of the chemokine detected by immunofluorescence and the presence of CD8 T cell or NK cell detected by immunohistochemistry. And you have an example here of such a sample. So we came with a model in which, in fact, TLR3 ligand can stimulate the production of CXCL10 by macrophages and parenchymal HCC cell, which now produce CXCL10, which attract Th1 cell, CD8 cell, NK cell, which produce more interferon gamma, which further synergize with the TLR3 ligand and in a way, stabilize this paracrine loop and stabilize an immune milieu, which is, in fact, protective for the patient. We find a similar observation for CCL5. CCL5 was produced initially by TLR3, by macrophages on HCC cell, but CCL5 then attract T cell and NK cell, which themselves produce CCL5. So in this case, instead of a paracrine loop, we have an autocrine loop, which again stabilizes the protective immune milieu. Okay, one of the predictions of this model is that by stimulating TLR receptor at the cell surface, we could probably induce expression of this chemokine and induce this immune milieu and attract T cell and NK cell into the tumor. And that's exactly what we found in a spontaneous model of HCC, in which we treated mice with established liver tumor, mice which are about 1 year old, with good and well-established tumor. We treated them with 3 injections of poly-IC IP, and we find not only expression of the chemokine, CCL5 and CXCL9, but also we observe an increased infiltration with NK cell, an increased expression within the tumor of perforin and granzyme, 2 effector molecules of NK cell, increased proliferation of T cell within the tumor, an increased proliferation of NK cell, and a reduced proliferation of the cancer cell and an increased apoptosis of this cancer cell. So in a way, showing that it is possible to modify the immune milieu in order to make it more permissive for the immune cell in order to penetrate the tumor. But what about human? Do drugs which, in fact, are effective against cancer, do they promote T-cell infiltration as well? It has been known for some time that chemotherapy, but not only chemotherapy, also targeted therapy, trying to inhibit specific kinase, can favorably impact the immune response in cancer patients. In the lab, in fact, what Michel found, Michel Hong, was that, in fact, treating melanoma cell line either with temozolomide or cisplatin could induce the expression of CCL5 on CXCL9 on CXCL10, two chemokines which share the same receptor. And more importantly, what Michel observed is that if you look in a cohort of melanoma patients treated with chemotherapy, chemotherapy is inducing expression of CXCL9, CXCL10, and CCL5 only in the tumor which are responsive to the chemotherapy. If you look at tumors which are resistant to chemotherapy, the black one here, you see that chemotherapy does not induce any modification in the expression of this chemokine. But in these tumors which are responsive to the chemotherapy, in fact, you observe an increased expression of these three chemokines, which translate in an increased infiltration of CD4 on CD8 cell. Even more importantly, in those patients in which chemotherapy was able to induce expression of this chemokine, we observe a prolonged survival. Okay, so we came with a model in which we think that we have identified a novel mode of action of chemotherapy, in which chemotherapy, of course, is inducing cell death, but in addition, it is inducing expression of chemokine, which favors the infiltration of the tumor by immune cell, and this somehow translates in reduced tumor growth and prolonged patient survival. Okay, so what I've shown you so far is that T cell can control tumor progression, that intratumoral infiltration with T cell correlate with survival, that intratumoral expression of T cell attracting chemokine correlate with survival, that intratumoral expression of cytokine which induce T cell attracting chemokine correlate with survival, and that it is possible, in fact, to modulate the tumor microenvironment in order to make it more permissive to T-cell infiltration. This was in the mouse model. And that in human, in fact, drugs that prolong survival promote T-cell infiltration. So this is for the first part on the classic view of the interaction between the immune system and the cancer. But of course, tumors are not made only of cancer cells, and the immune cells which are infiltrating the tumor are not only lymphocyte or NK cell. So there are also myeloid cells, and that's something that Benjamin analyzed in detail in our mouse model of melanoma. He found not only within the tumor, he found not only lymphocytic cell, CD4, CD8, B cell, NK cell, but he found that the majority of the immune cell infiltrating the tumor were in fact myeloid cell, including macrophages, of course, but various subsets of dendritic cell, and also MDSC, myeloid-derived suppressor cell, and two types of myeloid-derived suppressor cell. And what was quite interesting in his study is he found that primary tumor in this case, have a specific enrichment into granulocytic MDSCs. So these MDSCs, these myeloid-derived suppressor cells, are well known for their capacity to inhibit T-cell proliferation. So this is a classical MLR, and you see that increasing dose or numbers of MDSC are able to inhibit T-cell proliferation in this assay. Benjamin observed that, in fact, by co-cultivating MDSCs with tumor cell, in fact, MDSCs were also able to induce tumor cell proliferation, cancer cell proliferation. So in addition, these MDSC secrete factors that stimulate the proliferation of the cancer cell. But what was not only in vitro, in fact, in vivo, when Benjamin depleted this MDSC in vivo, he observed a reduced frequency of proliferating cancer cell and a reduced size of the primary tumor. But probably the most novel functions that Benjamin identified with this MDSC, when he co-cultivated these MDSCs, these epithelial cells with these MDSCs, he found that the cancer cell would change shape. So this is cancer cell without MDSC and now with MDSC. You see that now they have a different shape, that the junction between the epithelial cell disappear, and he also observed that, in fact, the cell became motile, so that these are epithelial cells cultivated alone, and this is when you act the MDSCs, you see that they now become highly motile, suggesting that, in fact, these MDSCs are inducing epithelial to mesenchymal transition in these cancer cells. And this increased motility can be quantified by looking at the path of the cancer cell on the slide. What you see here, so in the absence of MDSCs, you see that the cells are much less motile than in the presence of MDSCs. Okay, and in vivo, we could see that by depleting MDSC, we saw a decreased number of cells expressing both melanoma marker and the mesenchymal marker S100A4, And you can notice that we have a decreased number of these double positive cells are in fact have a different shape and are delimiting from the primary tumor. Okay, so clearly these MDSCs are able to induce epithelial to mesenchymal transition, not only in vitro but also in vivo. Okay, importantly, we found that by depleting the MDSC, we observe a reduced dissemination of the cancer cell to the draining lymph node, a reduced dissemination of the cancer cell to the lung, and a reduced number of skin metastases. So what I think we can conclude from this is that myeloid-derived suppressor cells, which are infiltrating the tumor, are not only shutting down the immune response, but they are promoting cancer cell dissemination. But of course, not all the cancer cells which disseminate are able to reinitiate metastasis. In fact, there is only a subset of these disseminated cancer cells which are able to initiate metastasis. And these tumor-initiating cells have some properties of stem cell, and some people call them cancer stem cell. What Mully in the lab found, on one way to quantify these cancer stem or tumor-initiating cell or cancer stem-like cell is by looking at measuring their capacity to grow as a spheroid in serum-free medium. What Mully found in the lab is that by depleting the immune cell from the primary tumor, she reduced the number of melanospheres that were growing in vitro. But moreover, when she was now adding a small number of macrophages, in fact only 2% of macrophages, she could increase the number of melanospheres, but not any type of macrophages. Lung macrophages derive from tumor-bearing mice, but not lung macrophages from non-tumor-bearing mice. M2 macrophages, but not M1 macrophages. So what this suggests is that there is a subset of macrophages which are able to promote the capacity of disseminated tumor cells to initiate metastasis, or that they are able to improve the stemness of these disseminated cancer cells. So if myeloid cells are the bad guy, if they are promoting dissemination or improving the tumor-initiating capacity of the disseminated cell, can we get rid of the macrophages? Can we get rid of the myeloid-derived suppressor cell? Probably this is one of the possible mode of action by which MEPACT, a product on which we are working at IDM, is working. What we found is that this product was clearly promoting the M1 phenotype of macrophages by stimulating the production of TNF-alpha, IL-1, IL-6, and IL-8, and more importantly, that patients who were either treated, when we compare patients who were treated with chemotherapy alone or a combination of chemotherapy plus MEPACT, we observe a prolonged survival of the patient. So now this drug is approved by the European agency and is commercialized in Europe by Takeda. And one of the possible mechanisms by which it's working is by re-educating the tumor-associated macrophages. Can we do something for MDSCs? In fact, Umansky has shown, using the same model as us, Umansky has shown that it is possible to prevent the accumulation of MDSCs in rat, in our melanoma model, by treating the mice with the phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor. For those in the lab who are in the audience who are young, phosphodiesterase inhibitor is better known in the general public as Viagra or Cialis. So can we treat the patient with Viagra in order to prevent dissemination? This is not my bench to bed part. Okay. The answer, unfortunately, is probably no, because cancer cell dissemination is an early event. Cancer cell dissemination in this model, we were able to demonstrate that it occurs at 3 weeks or 5 weeks of age. In fact, by 3 to 5 weeks of age, we can detect disseminated cancer cell everywhere in all the tissues that we have analyzed. And apparently, this is the case in human uveal melanoma and in prostate cancer as well. And probably breast cancer as well. So, in fact, by the time, and this is shown here, by the time that you can detect the primary tumor, you already have disseminated cancer cell everywhere. So it's probably not able to target the MDSC in order to prevent dissemination, unless we decide to put all the LC people under Viagra, which maybe is something difficult to decide. Anyway. the question is, if cancer cell dissemination is an early event, what happened? Why does it take 6 months in this model in order to get lung tumor, lung metastasis? So apparently, if cancer cell dissemination is an early event, it means that most of the disseminated cancer cells remain dormant for a prolonged period of time. So we gradually come from a model in which tumor cell dissemination is a late event, meaning the primary tumor grows, and when there is no more space, no more nutrient, some courageous cancer cell disseminate in order to conquer new territories, to a model in which, in fact, very early during the growth of the primary tumor, cancer cells are able to attract immune cells, which promote epithelial to mesenchymal transition and then dissemination of the cancer cell. But if this is the case, if dissemination is an early event and cancer cells remain dormant for a prolonged period of time, why do cancer cells disseminate? What is the driving force which select for mesenchymal-like cancer cell? What are the selective pressure driving this early cancer cell dissemination? It cannot be immediately, the growth of the metastasis, because it takes months before the metastasis develop, and as we all know, natural selection is blind to the future, a little bit like our political leaders, these days. So in order to address this question, in fact, the first clue to address this question was the observation that when we depleted, that our primary tumors are usually multinodular, not compact tumor, and that by depleting the MDSC, in fact, we are reducing the nodularity of our tumor. Based on this, Alex Couillard in SIGN started an in silico modeling in which, in fact, and this is a model called agent-based model, in which we can define the property of the individual cell, when they proliferate, when they die, how much nutrients they consume, how they interact with each other, how they interact with the extracellular matrix. And we could, in fact, using this model, identify conditions in which the tumor grow as a multinodular tumor rather than a compact tumor. And we found out that, in fact, in order to get a multinodular tumor, cancer cells need to compete for nutrient, have increased motility, reduced intercellular adhesion, and limited adhesion to the extracellular matrix. So, in fact, mesenchymal-like cells probably grow as multinodular, while epithelial cells grow as compact tumor. And this suggests that, of course, when you see a multinodular tumor, it's an indication first of nutrient competition, and second, it's an indication of mesenchymal-like cell or ongoing epithelial to mesenchymal transition. And more importantly, what we found in this in silico model was that under condition of competition for nutrient, multinodular tumor would grow faster than compact tumor. We even simulated a situation in which initially all the tumor cells are epithelial, but after a certain period of time, one of the epithelial cells undergo epithelial to mesenchymal transition, so become mesenchymal, less adhesion and more motility. And you can see that even under this condition, mesenchymal-like cell manage to outcompete the epithelial cell and invade the entire tumor. So we came with a model in which, in fact, epithelial cells, which are able to attract either macrophage or MDSCs, undergo mesenchymal transition, and that mesenchymal cells now grow faster and get a selective advantage within the primary tumor. In fact, metastasis is just a side effect of this Christophe would say a collateral damage of mesenchymal transition. But it means that we would suggest that, in fact, cancer cells which are prone to metastasis are selected for their growth advantage within the primary tumor microenvironment. And this is quite interesting because it explains, first of all, why multinodular tumors have been associated with the worst prognosis. It also explains why, when you treat cancer patients with Avastin, so an antibody which prevents the vascularization of the tumor, you increase competition for nutrient, and you select for variants of the tumor which are more aggressive. Okay. So in summary, what I've tried to convince you here is that, yes, the immune system and the cancer are interacting. Of course, lymphocytic cell or some type of immune cell can help to control the growth of the tumor, but there is obviously some myeloid cells which are present within the tumor and which first promote tumor growth, second, promote cancer cell dissemination, and then promote tumor initiation capacity of this disseminated tumor cell. And I think we need to better understand this complex interaction between the immune system and the cancer cell if we would like to develop better drug in order to prolong patient survival. And I will stop here by showing you the interactome within the lab. So the work I've shown you is mostly the work of Benjamin for the epithelial to mesenchymal transition, Valérie Xu for the work on HCC, Michel Hong for the work on chemotherapy, on the extrinsic mode of action of chemotherapy, and Alessandra Nardin for the work on chemotherapy and also the work on HCC. And this is the hard lives that we have in Singapore. So you have Valérie, Benjamin, Molly, Michel, Joe, Alessandra, and these are our collaborators. Of course, within SIGN, Alex Gouya and Viping for the modelization. For the mouse model, of course, Masashi Kato and Armel Blondel in Cochin for the rat model for melanoma. Émilie Barchapeau and Nancy Jenkins for the HCC model. Jean-Paul Thierry for the work on epithelial to mesenchymal transition, but also all our clinicians who provide us with all these cancer patient sample, especially Marie-Françoise Avril for the melanoma sample, many clinicians for the HCC sample, some in Singapore, some in Hong Kong, and some even in Switzerland. And I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Yeah.